At an exclusive airport lounge, a black woman was arrested simply for taking a seat she rightfully paid for. What started as routine questioning quickly escalated into a shocking display of racial profiling, caught on camera for the world to see. But little did the officer know, this moment would spark a movement that would change everything. How will justice be served? And what happens when the truth can no longer be ignored? Stay tuned to find out. Don't forget to subscribe, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Dr. Maya Evans adjusted the strap of her leather laptop bag as she walked through the bustling Los Angeles International Airport, LAX. After a long week at an international conference, all she wanted was a quiet space to unwind before her flight home. As a renowned historian specializing in African American studies, Maya was no stranger to navigating elite spaces. Dressed in a fitted navy blazer and tailored pants, she exuded the confidence of someone who belonged. The VIP lounge was a welcome retreat from the chaotic terminal. Plush leather chairs, soft jazz playing in the background, and the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. She sighed in relief as she settled into a corner seat near the window, placing her laptop bag beside her. Just as she began typing an email, she noticed a uniformed officer lingering near the entrance, Officer Laura Whitman. In her late 40s, Whitman had sharp eyes that scanned the room with suspicion. Though Maya had no reason to feel uneasy, something about the way Whitman's gaze fixated on her felt unsettling. Moments later, Whitman approached. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, her tone polite but clipped. "May I see your boarding pass and ID?" Maya looked up, holding Whitman's gaze. "Of course," she said, retrieving her boarding pass. "Is there a problem?" "Just a routine check," Whitman replied, inspecting the ticket longer than necessary. "Business class?" she muttered under her breath. "Yes," Maya answered firmly. "I travel frequently." Whitman pursed her lips, hesitating before finally handing the ticket back. "Enjoy your flight," she said, though something in her voice suggested this wasn't over. Maya took a deep breath, pushing aside the discomfort from her brief exchange with Officer Whitman. She had experienced subtle forms of bias before. Sideways glances in high-end restaurants, extra scrutiny while shopping in luxury stores. But she refused to let this moment ruin her peace. She turned back to her laptop, sipping her coffee as she skimmed through emails. However, the uneasy feeling lingered. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed Whitman hadn't left the lounge. Instead, the officer seemed to be circling the room, stopping occasionally to check other passengers' passes. But none of them received the same prolonged attention Maya had. Maya decided to ignore it, reminding herself that she had every right to be there. But just as she was about to resume her work, Whitman returned. "Ma'am," Whitman's voice was firmer this time. "I need to see your boarding pass again." Maya's eyebrows furrowed. "I just showed it to you," she said, keeping her tone calm but direct. "I understand, but I need to verify something," Whitman insisted. Maya exhaled slowly, then reached into her bag and handed the pass over again. Whitman examined it even more thoroughly than before, flipping it over, as if expecting to find something amiss. "Are you traveling alone?" Whitman asked. Maya tilted her head slightly, sensing the unnecessary questioning. "Yes, I am," she said evenly. "Does that matter?" Whitman didn't answer right away. Instead, she scanned the room, as if looking for a reason to justify her actions. "We don't usually see new faces in this lounge," she finally said. Maya let out a humorless chuckle. "New faces?" she repeated. "Or just people like me?" Whitman's jaw tightened. "That's not what I meant." Maya's patience was wearing thin. Then what did you mean, officer? She challenged, her voice steady. Whitman hesitated but didn't back down. Just making sure everything checks out, she muttered, before finally handing the ticket back. Maya held her gaze for a moment, before taking the pass and tucking it away. She had a sinking feeling this wasn't over. As Whitman turned and walked away, Maya noticed a few other passengers watching the exchange, whispering among themselves. Maya tried to shake off the frustration bubbling inside her. She had complied, twice, but Officer Whitman's scrutiny lingered like an unspoken accusation. She knew better than to react emotionally. Instead, she straightened her shoulders, turned back to her laptop, and tried to focus. However, Whitman wasn't done. A few minutes later, she returned, this time standing even closer. "Ma'am," Whitman said, arms crossed over her uniform. "I'm going to need to check your bag." Maya froze, lifting her eyes from her screen. "Excuse me?" "I need to conduct a security check on your belongings," Whitman repeated. Maya's heartbeat quickened. "I don't see you checking anyone else's bags," she said, scanning the room. Around her, other travelers sipped cocktails, read newspapers, or scrolled on their phones, completely undisturbed. "It's standard procedure," Whitman said flatly. Maya gave a short, humorless laugh. "Standard for whom?" she challenged. Whitman's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, I suggest you comply." Maya leaned forward slightly, keeping her voice calm but firm. "I have complied. I showed you my ID, twice. I gave you my boarding pass, twice. And now you want to search my belongings? For what reason?" Whitman's hand rested on the radio at her hip. "Are you refusing a security check?" A few passengers nearby had turned their heads, sensing the tension. One older man in a business suit furrowed his brow, clearly uneasy. A woman near the refreshment counter pulled out her phone and started recording. "I'm refusing an unjustified security check," Maya corrected. "Unless you have probable cause, you have no right to search my bag." Whitman exhaled sharply. "We can do this the easy way, or we can escalate the situation." Maya held her ground. "And what exactly do you mean by escalate?" Whitman took a step forward, lowering her voice. "It means I will have to ask you to leave the lounge." Maya folded her arms. "So, let me get this straight. You're targeting me, a paying customer, for sitting in a space I have every right to be in, despite me complying with every request. And now, because I won't let you violate my rights, you want to remove me." Whitman's expression remained unreadable, but her fingers twitched against her belt. "Ma'am," she repeated, her voice now clipped with impatience, "gather your things. You need to leave." A murmur spread through the room. Passengers exchanged glances, whispering among themselves. One man near the window muttered, "This is ridiculous." Maya took a deep breath, keeping her anger in check. "No," she said simply. Whitman's eyebrows shot up. "Excuse me?" "I said no," Maya repeated. "Unless you have an actual reason to remove me. I'm staying right here." Whitman's face darkened, and her radio crackled as she reached for it. "That's it," she muttered. "I'm calling for backup." Maya's stomach dropped. She had known this moment was coming, but she hadn't expected it to spiral this quickly. Around her, more people had pulled out their phones, sensing something was very, very wrong. And in that moment, Maya knew the situation was about to explode. Maya sat still, her heartbeat pounding in her ears as Officer Whitman reached for her radio. The room, once filled with a soft murmur of quiet conversation, was now thick with tension. More passengers had pulled out their phones, their screens glowing, as they recorded the escalating situation. "This is Officer Whitman," she said into her radio, her voice clipped. I have a non-compliant individual in the VIP lounge, requesting immediate backup. Maya's eyes widened. Non-compliant. She had complied every step of the way, more than anyone else in the room had been asked to. "You can't be serious," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. Whitman didn't answer. Instead, she stood rigid, waiting. Within minutes, 2 additional airport officers arrived, their presence shifting the atmosphere. A hush fell over the lounge. Passengers whispered, their eyes darting between Maya and the officers. One of the new officers, Officer Daniels, stepped forward. He was taller, broader than Whitman, and looked more uncertain about the situation. "What's going on here?" he asked. Whitman gestured toward Maya. "She refused a security check and is now refusing to leave the lounge." Maya let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "That is not what happened." Daniels glanced at Maya, then at the growing crowd watching them. "Ma'am, do you have a valid ticket for this lounge?" Maya lifted her boarding pass, still in her hand. "Yes, and I've shown it, twice." Daniels looked at Whitman. "Then, what's the issue?" "She's being uncooperative," Whitman snapped. "I asked her to leave, and she refused." Daniels hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. Clearly, he wasn't as certain about this as Whitman was. Maya inhaled deeply, gathering her composure. "Officer Daniels, let me be clear. I have complied with every request. The only reason I'm being harassed right now is because I don't fit Officer Whitman's idea of who belongs in this space." A murmur rippled through the lounge. Passengers nodded, some whispering in agreement. "That's not true," Whitman said quickly. "I'm simply following protocol." Maya's patience snapped. "Then why am I the only person here being checked repeatedly?" Whitman's face flushed. "Enough," she said, stepping forward. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Gasps echoed through the lounge. "Are you arresting me?" Maya's voice rang out, loud and clear. "You are refusing a lawful order," Whitman said, grabbing Maya's wrist. Maya yanked her arm back. "I am refusing to be harassed." Whitman snapped the handcuffs around Maya's wrists, yanking her up from her seat. The lounge erupted. "What the hell?" one man near the bar shouted. "This is disgusting," a woman in a business suit said, shaking her head. Phones flashed, cameras recorded. "This is wrong," someone said. Maya's voice rose above the commotion. "Record everything." And the world was already watching. Maya sat in a cold, fluorescent-lit holding room at the airport security office, her wrists sore from the 2 tight handcuffs that had only just been removed. Her mind raced, replaying the humiliating moments in the lounge, being dragged away in cuffs, the stunned faces of onlookers, the sound of phones recording every second. Her phone, now returned to her, buzzed nonstop. A mix of missed calls, texts, and notifications flooded the screen. She didn't need to look to know what was happening. The world had seen everything. At the very moment, videos of her arrest were spreading like wildfire across social media. Clips of Officer Whitman's aggressive behavior, her unnecessary questioning, her insistence that Maya leave the moment she pulled out the cuffs, went viral within hours. Justice for Maya was trending. Across the country, people reacted with outrage. Celebrities, politicians, and civil rights organizations condemned the incident, calling it a clear case of racial profiling. The ACLU and NAACP issued statements demanding accountability. Back at the airport, the pressure mounted. The chief of airport security, already flooded with media inquiries, called an emergency meeting. "This is a PR nightmare," one administrator muttered. "The footage speaks for itself," another said. Whitman didn't just overstep. She targeted Dr. Evans. Maya's attorney, Rebecca Hayes, a fierce civil rights lawyer, arrived at the station minutes later. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "My client is leaving now," she said, her voice sharp. "And you better believe we'll be pursuing legal action." An officer hesitated. She was non-compliant. Rebecca slammed a file onto the desk. "I have 24 videos that say otherwise." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. They knew the public was watching. An hour later, Maya walked out of the station, free but far from done. Outside, reporters swarmed her, microphones shoved toward her face. "Dr. Evans, do you have a comment?" Maya took a deep breath, looking straight into the cameras. "This isn't just about me," she said firmly. "It's about every person who has ever been told they don't belong. And I'm not staying silent." The fight was just beginning. The uproar surrounding Maya's arrest only intensified in the following days. The video footage, now viewed by millions, sparked protests outside the airport and demands for accountability from the public. Under intense pressure, the airport police department announced an internal investigation into Officer Whitman's conduct. But the public wasn't interested in bureaucratic delays. They wanted action. A week later, breaking news flashed across national networks. Officer Laura Whitman has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. It wasn't enough. Maya, now working closely with civil rights attorney Rebecca Hayes, was preparing to take legal action. They gathered witness testimonies from passengers in the VIP lounge, many of whom were eager to speak out. One, a businessman named James Morton, provided a particularly damning statement. "I saw everything," he told reporters. Dr. Evans wasn't being disruptive. That officer targeted her the moment she walked in. Meanwhile, internal records on Whitman's history surfaced. She had received multiple complaints of racial profiling over the years, all quietly dismissed. "That's the pattern," Rebecca said, reviewing the files with Maya. "This wasn't a mistake. This is who she is." With the weight of public pressure, legal action, and damning evidence, the airport police had no choice but to take further action. 2 weeks after Maya's wrongful arrest, the department issued a formal statement. Officer Whitman's actions violated departmental policy. She has been terminated from her position, effective immediately. Maya sat in her attorney's office when the news broke. For the first time since the ordeal began, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Rebecca smirked, tossing the official statement onto the desk. "Took them long enough." Maya exhaled, shaking her head. "It shouldn't have taken viral videos and national outrage to get here." Rebecca nodded. "But it did. And now, we make sure this never happens again." Whitman's firing was a victory. But for Maya, it wasn't the end of the fight. It was just the beginning of something bigger. The firing of Officer Whitman was a small victory, but for Maya, it wasn't enough. The problem wasn't just one officer. It was an entire system that allowed racial profiling to happen over and over again. Sitting across from Rebecca Hayes, her attorney, Maya folded her arms. "We got one officer fired. Great. But what happens next? What stops the next Whitman from doing the same thing to someone else?" Rebecca nodded. "That's the real question. And I think you already know the answer." Maya exhaled. She did. Change had to happen at a systemic level. With public support behind her, Maya launched a campaign against racial profiling in airport security. She began working with civil rights organizations to push for new policies, including mandatory bias training and independent oversight committees to review discrimination complaints. The movement gained traction quickly. Maya spoke at press conferences, university panels, and community meetings, sharing her story not as a victim, but as a catalyst for change. "This isn't just about me," she told a packed audience at a town hall event. "It's about every person who's ever been made to feel like they don't belong in a space they rightfully earned." Her words resonated across the country. People shared their own stories of discrimination in airport lounges, high-end stores, and corporate offices. Major news networks continued to follow her case, and soon she received an invitation from a senator working on racial justice reform. "We need people like you in this fight," the senator told her over the phone. "Your story has the nation's attention. Let's turn that into real policy." Maya didn't hesitate. "I'm in." As the months passed, her advocacy led to policy changes in several major airports. Some even implemented new training programs, modeled after the ones Maya and her team helped develop. But Maya knew the fight wasn't over. It was bigger than just airport security. It was about every institution that allowed bias to thrive unchecked. And she was just getting started. Months after the incident, Maya stood at a podium, addressing a crowd of activists, policymakers, and supporters. The journey from humiliation to advocacy had been exhausting, but she knew this was bigger than just her experience. She adjusted the microphone and took a deep breath. "This fight isn't just about me," she began, her voice strong and steady. "It's about changing a system that has allowed racial profiling to go unchecked for too long." The crowd erupted in applause. Looking out, Maya saw faces of people who had been inspired by her story, travelers who had been unfairly targeted, young professionals who had faced the same scrutiny, families who had been denied access to spaces they rightfully belonged in. Later that evening, as she sat in her hotel room, Rebecca called her. "You realize what you've done, right?" Rebecca said. Maya smiled. "What's that?" "You turned a moment of injustice into a movement." Maya exhaled, feeling both the weight and the power of that statement. "It still doesn't feel like enough." Rebecca chuckled. "It never does. That's how you know you're making real change." The next morning, as Maya scrolled through news articles covering her latest policy push, she realized something. This wasn't just about one airport, one officer, or one case. It was about demanding accountability everywhere. And she wasn't done yet. She put her phone down, grabbed her bag, and headed out the door. There was still work to do. Maya's story is more than just an isolated incident. It's a wake-up call. It reminds us that racial bias and discrimination still exist, even in places where people assume equality prevails. Her experience in the VIP lounge exposes the subtle but damaging ways people of color are treated differently, often forced to prove they belong in spaces they've rightfully earned. So, what can we take from this? First, awareness is key. We must recognize when bias occurs, not just blatant racism, but the quieter, more insidious forms, like unnecessary questioning or extra scrutiny. If you witness discrimination, speak up. The people in that lounge who recorded and voiced their outrage made a difference. Silence allows injustice to continue. Second, advocacy leads to change. Maya didn't stop at demanding justice for herself. She turned her experience into a movement. We can all do the same by supporting policies that ensure fair treatment, holding institutions accountable, and pushing for reforms where bias exists. Finally, resilience matters. Maya refused to let one officer define her worth. No one should have to justify their right to exist in a space they belong in. Confidence, persistence, and community support are the keys to lasting change. If you were in her shoes, what would you do? Would you fight for your rights and refuse to back down, one? Or compromise to avoid confrontation and potential risks, two? Drop a 1 or 2 in the comments, and share your thoughts. I'd love to hear your perspective. And don't forget to like and subscribe. There are many more powerful stories coming your way. Double asterisk.